A lot of the habits I used to do, even up until a couple of years ago, they used to be very, they used to be in a very specific manner. I used to, the food I used to eat, the habits I used to have, you can speculate for yourself. I used to play a lot of games, so the games I used to play, not even just the games I used to play, just the gaming itself. All these stuff I used to do, they were done because they made me happy in the moment. Because the dopamine receptors or the feedback I would get from maybe the gaming, I was getting good at video games, so the habit would reinforce itself because I was getting good at it. Whatever the reason was, I used to do these habits because they made me happy in the moment. But the irony is, after doing these habits for many, many years, they started to shift in terms of how they made me feel. Soon they didn't really stimulate me as much as they used to. Eventually they started making me feel bad about myself. How ironic is that? Because because they used to make me feel the sense of happiness, now they make me sad. How did that happen? What was the disconnect? Did something change about me, about the habits? Where did it go wrong? And what happened was, I didn't understand the concept I'm going to try and convey to you guys. Instant versus delayed gratification. You might have maybe heard of this. Maybe you already know about this, maybe you don't, but I'm going to try and explain the bro science version of it. Basically what happens is, a lot of the habits that I talked about, gaming, and eating trash food, whatever you can speculate, they were instantly gratifying habits. And what classifies as an instantly gratifying habit is something that gives you pleasure in the long term and sacrifices your gives you gratification in the short term and sacrifices it for the long term. You can think about it like, people like to get credit cards, so they buy stuff, they get themselves in debt using their credit cards, spending all the money, and they get themselves in debt and they have to pay that money later on in life. So they spend the money now with the credit, build up the debt, so they have the money now and they spend it, but they still have to pay the money. They just have to pay it later on in life, and there's going to be interest on that money, so they have to actually pay even more than what they actually ended up spending. That's a pretty good, I guess, example of what instant gratification things are. You're spending your currency of dopamine, of feeling good, of happiness now, and you get a very big high of the, I guess, gratification, but you will pay for it exponentially more in the long run. Sometimes that will be a slow burn. Sometimes the feel bad will happen instantly, and that's all because of the reward chemical in our system called dopamine. We have dopamine receptors in the back of our brains, yada yada, that doesn't matter. But basically what happens is, whenever you do something whenever you feel good, you're releasing a chemical called dopamine. You definitely have heard of it. It's a pretty big term nowadays on the internet. But what happens is, when you do an instantly gratifying task, you get a big spike in dopamine. When you do something that feels good instantly, woo, all the way up, you get a big high. But the dopamine has to come back down, because human beings, that's what we are, Homo sapiens. We don't feel good all the time, right? Sometimes we feel bad, sometimes we feel happy. When you have a big spike in dopamine, it has to come back down. And the sharper I guess the gradient, the more steep the gradient of the dopamine is that you receive, the steeper the decline is gonna be. So if you can imagine that you have a baseline of dopamine, how you feel normally, pretty much, I'd say. So you can do stuff to elevate or deplenish, I guess, your base levels of dopamine. But everyone has a baseline of dopamine. That's pretty much how they feel not doing anything, how they feel everyday Joe Schmo doing XYZ activity. That's how they feel. And dopamine will, and then that baseline, whenever you get an increase in dopamine, you'll go above your baseline of dopamine. That means you're happy. And if you go below the baseline, that means you feel sad. You're in a bad mood. And what happens is, when you do an instantly gratifying task, you'll get the big spike in dopamine in the short run, and you'll feel very good, but the same amount that you went up, the same amount you will go down. Your baseline. That's why when I was playing video games and doing all these habits, eating all this terrible food, I may have felt good in the short run, but I felt after the high, so to speak, went away, I felt horrible about myself. And what happens is, the same habits that you do, if you repeatedly do them, what happens is they don't give the same high. I like using the word high because it relates to drugs as well, dopamine, but it's a pretty clever analogy, I'd say. The habits that you used to do for that big spike in dopamine, once you repeat those activities, they don't have the same effect that they once had. You build a resistance towards that stimulus, and what happens is you need more of that same stimulus for the same high. And that's how you end up eating more junk food or playing longer hours of video games so that you can get that same high. But then when you reach that same high, you actually delve even deeper down below your baseline. Because you're even deeper below your baseline, you need even more dopamine to counteract that sad state you're in. And it becomes a cycle almost. You can see what's happening here, right? You get the high in the beginning, then you feel bad. Because you feel bad, you do the activity again. But because you have a resistance towards the activity, you have to do more of the activity. And then because you do more of the activity, you go even lower down your baseline. It's an endless cycle, self-destructive. Instant gratification is just you in the short term and benefiting yourself for now. And then because you're only benefiting yourself now, you suffer in the long run. Maybe you can think of some stuff you do, some habits you have in your life that are instantly gratifying. There is a time and place for instant gratification, for sure. I think one of the best examples I can give is when you want to enforce a good habit. So, because of how instant gratification works and how the human mind works, we respond way better to reward as opposed to punishment. If you want to teach your kid something, or your son something / daughter something, it's much easier to teach them through reward than punishment. So what you can do is, maybe if you're trying to build up a new habit for yourself, whether that be whatever it may be, learning a new instrument, going to the gym, or trying to learn a new language, whatever it may be, you can use instant gratification to your advantage. So let's say you go to the gym, you hit a hard workout, good sets, close to failure, you got a decent pump in, you saw some veins popping out, and then you instantly reward yourself with something instantly gratifying. Now, you don't want to be stupid about it and just reward yourself heroin or some bullshit, but you know what I'm trying to say. You reward yourself after doing something hard. Maybe it could be a little instant gratifying, and all instant gratification is bad, but you're enforcing this habit that is actually delayed gratification, which I'll get into later on. So in a way, your instant gratification is enforcing your good habits. There is a time and place for instant gratification habits, but a lot of instant gratificating habits themselves aren't all that good, as they're very short-sighted. They don't build to who you want to be, they just build towards what you want right now and fulfilling your human desires and instincts. So if that's instant gratification, let's talk about some delayed gratification. Let's go back to that little baseline dopamine and those little ups and downs I was talking about before. So if you have your baseline dopamine, we talked about how with instant gratification goes way up then way down. So what happens with delayed gratification? Well, what happens with delayed gratification, you can say you will have a short bit of discomfort in the short term right now. So as opposed to instant gratification, you had a big dopamine spike. Delayed gratification, you actually have a dip in your dopamine. You feel bad in the short term, you feel discomfort, you feel uneasy, you get scared, you feel all these negative emotions, you feel doubtful. That's what that little decline in dopamine is in the short term. But then what happens is your dopamine actually goes up, and because the decline in dopamine was short, the increase in dopamine is also kind of short, but it's a longer burn. So what that means is, as opposed to instant gratification where it goes way up, way down, it goes a little bit down, and then it goes way up. If you try to get what I'm saying. So you'll have, for example, if you're trying to build a business, you will have, in the shorter term, you will not gain any results that are monumental, that you can brag about if you are the type to brag about stuff in general. And you'll have that short term, you'll have the discomfort, you'll have the loss in quality of life. You'll be eating 1 minute ramen noodles, you'll be driving a shitbox, you'll be you know what I'm trying to say. You will have that short term displeasure, that short term unease and uncomfortability. But then what happens is, as your business starts to grow, you start to gain the bags, the money. What happens is you'll start your dip in dopamine starts to go back to baseline, and it actually starts to go up. But because for example, building a business, it takes so long, and that period of discomfort you went in was so long, that the period of happiness and joyfulness and the increase in dopamine will be longer as well. So it will be a longer burn of dopamine, and that's because of the short term slow burn of less dopamine. And just like instant gratification, where it goes up and it goes down way below what it went up, because of delayed gratification, whenever it goes down, it goes up way more, and also a longer burn of dopamine. So you just feel better in general. You're not just getting this big high and then crashing. Now you have a choice to make: instant or delayed gratification. Most people opt for instant gratification, as it makes sense, because we're humans, and our ancestors, that's how they used to live. They used to always find a threat in the short term and figure how to survive, not thrive. And now, as a consequence of that, it's all been embedded into us, and we can't really do much about it except fight our instincts, I guess, and try to build towards something and sacrifice the short term for the long term. Most people choose instant gratification tasks, whatever they may be, different from person to person, still the same instant gratificating tasks. I used to choose instant gratifying tasks as well. for a lot of my life until a couple years ago when I started, trying to build towards something. And delayed gratification, even though, okay, you will feel discomfort for sure, but who cares, man? I just feel so much better because I know I'm trying to do something with my life. I know I'm aligned myself to something that I genuinely enjoy, and not just this facade of enjoyment that I feel in the short term. And then just a couple months later, I feel terrible doing the same thing because I just destroyed my dopamine receptors and I have so much resistance against this stimulus. I need 10 times more dose for the same output. It's so ironic thinking you do whatever you want to do in the short term and you'd be alright, but you actually just have to build towards what you want to do, which makes sense, but sometimes you just forget to do that. I certainly didn't even know about the concept until a couple years ago, trying to actually build towards something, the person you want to be when you're 80 years old and the 80-year-old version of you reflects back on your life. How will they look at who you are right now? Will they be proud of the actions you were taking right now? Or will they be disappointed and be regretful for the stuff that you are doing right now? Just have a think about it. Think about all the tasks you are doing and that you should be doing and that you want to do. Which ones are instantly gratifying and which ones are delayed gratification, and choose wisely on what you want to do. Again, instant gratification tasks, they're not all bad. Sometimes you can use them, but for the most part you should try and avoid. I found my life has been the best when I've delayed my gratification and delayed the pleasure for the long term, not trying to get those easy wins that happen instantly, trying to build towards those big wins, trying to build towards something that I'll be genuinely proud about when I reflect on my life when I'm 80 years old.